we were talking about the motivating factors for Rashi. We started with really a difficulty in the pasuk, meaning a logical difficulty or something is just not right. We gave a couple of examples of that. Then we said unnecessary words or info, meaning information that the Torah really didn't need to tell us, meaning it doesn't seem to have any function or purpose. And that's when Rashi would put in some info, something that is a deviation from the pshat, so to speak. Filling in the gaps for a storyline, we gave two examples of that. Reuven, where did he come from? Why wasn't he there? Or Leah and Rachel, right? Why is Yaakov doesn't realize that he's with Leah? So there Rashi has to fill in the gaps in the story. Then we have filling in the gaps people, and that's when Rashi basically says we keep having this. These are general examples, but they are I guess patterns or characteristics of Rashi's Perush in general, right? Shnei Anashim. We keep having a group of people unidentified called Anashim, and they're always doing bad things. And one time they're identified as Rasha. And then we have a situation where two people who are Rishaim are identified as Anashim. So then Rashi plays it all back into all the backwards into all the situations and says these Anashim are the same people every single time. And again, what that does, this is something I didn't really talk about last time, but I'm just going to make this bigger. What that does for the reader is that it creates a storyline that is consistent and it creates storylines within the story to better understand the unfolding of events, right? It's not just Stam, Anashim. He wants you to understand that there are multiple layers of the story that are taking place here, and that basically Datan and Aviran and Korach, this isn't the first time. This is the climax, but this started when Moshe was in Egypt, right? So Rashi is throwing this back from the beginning to show you understand the stories on a much deeper level, and you understand the showdown with Korach on a much deeper level because these people keep coming up, right? So if you don't identify these people, they're just random people. Okay, so that's, you're losing out, Rashi would say, on some deeper level of the pshat because you don't have that. Okay. Now we have what's I'll call more of a modern question, which is, to what extent does Rashi, and this is new stuff, to what extent will Rashi, to make a stronger claim, be influenced by non-textual factors to go with a perush? Meaning to say, there's nothing in the text, there's no problematic, details, there's no unnecessary details. There's nothing like that, but Rashi just wants to make a point, whether it's a Musar point, whether it's a pointing out how special the Jewish people are, whether or not it's pointing out how bad the Goyim are, whatever the point may be. Is there times where Rashi will just say, I don't care what the words are, I just want to throw in a midrash? So this is a machloket really between more modern people. Nechama Leibowitz, Alei Shalom, if you don't know who she is, she's one of the pioneers of Torah study in the 20th century, especially the study of Tanakh, Torah. And she was a very, very, very strong proponent of the idea that only Rashi's Midrashim always were addressing something in the text. If it seems like it's just random, it's because you didn't understand something in the text, or you're missing a grammar point, or you're missing the overall context in the story. That is her approach, and it's really the approach, I would say, of the majority of more of the traditional interpreters of Rashi. And the reason for that is because if you don't subscribe to that approach, you really open up a Pandora's box of, then it just becomes sort of, whenever we can't figure out what the text was, we'll just throw something on Rashi. Oh, this is because of the Crusades, or this is because, he didn't like this Christian guy, or he didn't like that Christian guy, or whatever it is. Most of the time it'll be a battle against Christianity, right? But the more modern approach is summarized here, that in cases in which the homily seems crucial from an educational point of view, despite the, right, one must cite it, despite the fact that the connection between it and the language of the verse is very shaky, right? The famous question, which was so beloved by Nechama Leibowitz, what is bothering Rashi, which was always a textual question, is appropriate for many of his comments, but not all of them. Meaning to say, sometimes you ask, what's bothering Rashi in the pasuk? And the answer is nothing. He just wanted to tell you something else, right? Now, like I said, it's a slippery slope, because then you really open up the I'll give you an example. A while ago, this guy named Professor Mark Shapiro, he was written a lot of books, some of them more controversial than others. He wrote one about the Rambam, and he wrote in one of his chapters that the Mefarshim of the Rambam bent over backwards in so many different ways to try and be mitaretz, to try and answer up for the Rambam. And he says, you know what, sometimes the options on the table should have been, he got it wrong. He was wrong. Meaning, he says you should just say that instead of doing, like, let's say, for example, the Gemara quotes a pasuk as being the source of something, and the Rambam brings down the thing that it's a source for, but brings a different pasuk. So the Mefarshim will go out of their way. Why did the Rambam bring that and not the one in the Gemara? And he says, maybe he just made a mistake. He got the pasuk wrong, right? That's what he wants to say. And I think that's a horrible way of going about. I strongly disagree with that, because even if it might be true, meaning that the Rambam maybe in one instance, two instances, made a mistake, he misquoted a pasuk or something like that, which are instances where we know he misquoted pasukim. That's not, it's not blasphemous to say such a thing, but it's more just intellectually sloppy to be willing to fall back on the answer of, he made a mistake, because then at any point where you don't understand it, you could just say he made a mistake, right? You don't really need to do the level of investigation of that's necessary. So that's why I really prefer this approach. But it's important to have this one in mind, because it does exist. Okay. Just because we had Parashat Va'etchanan, I wanted to bring an example of this where potentially you could say that there is some sort of non-textual reason that's motivating Rashi. And we have here, right? Ki am kadosh ata l'Hashem Elokecha b'cha b'char Hashem Elokecha liyot lo l'am segula mikol amim asher al pnei adama. Because God chose you, you are a special nation, you are am kadosh, segula mihamim. And now the pasuk says, Lo meru bechem mikol amim chashak Hashem b'chem v'yivchar b'chem ki atem ham'at mikol hamim. It's not because you're many people, God desired you, but because, right? Rather, key here is like, not because, but rather you are one of the smallest of the nations. And then he says it's rather because of the love of God that he had for your forefathers and the oath that he made to them, and that he took them out of Egypt. Now look at Rashi. Susie, can you close the doors in here, please? Thank you. He says straight out, Lo meru bechem kipishuto. It means not because you are many, right? However, then he says umidrasho. So immediately Rashi is identifying the fact that the pashat is Lo meru bechem, not because you are multitude, meaning a lot of people. However, he says umidrasho. He says it's not meru bechem, that you're multiple, a lot of people, but rather because lo meru bechem, you do not increase your sem, almost like meravechem, right? You do not aggrandize yourself when I do things for you. You don't think you're so special, right? And that's why I do. And then when he goes and explains ki atem ham'at, he doesn't even go kipeshuto. He takes the midrash and he says ham'atim atzmechem. You belittle yourself or you humble yourself. And now he gives an example. Kigon Avraham, Kigon Moshe v'Aaron, and not like who? Nebuchadnezzar and Sancherib. So it's very easy to read this Rashi and say he agrees that this is a perfect example where this school, right, might say, you know what? He agrees that he's not explaining it the pshat way because he said kipishuto, right? He said it. He knows it's not the pshat. But he's going out of his way to say, bring this midrash, even though he said he wouldn't usually. Why? Because he wants to teach a lesson about how good the Jews are versus how bad the Goyim are. That's what I'm putting this in their words, but that's one possible way of going about understanding this Rashi. However, I don't think that's the case at all. And I think there's a very good reason within the pshat of the Pesukim why Rashi is bringing this. Because if you read the Pesukim, what's the connection between us being multiple and this pasuk and that pasuk? There's no real connection. It says you're special, you're a holy nation, God chose you, and you're special from all the other nations of the earth. and it wasn't because of merubechem, right? It was rather because hamat. Okay, those are the two words under contention. Then what does the third pasuk come and do? It comes and contrasts what God loves about us between Avraham and our forefathers and Paro, right? Basically. It basically says, we loved Avraham so much and we wanted to get you away from Paro so badly. That's why Hashem took you out, basically, right? This whole idea of miyad Paro melech Mitzrayim, we didn't need to say that, right? But clearly Rashi is picking up on here that there's the Pesukim here are not just focusing on numbers, because that's not really part of the context and it's not part of the connection. Rather, it's talking about some characteristic that makes Ahavat Hashem and the Shomrat HaShavua that makes that real, which is the humility that comes with it. So I don't think it's that far-fetched to find, even within the words here, something. So that's why I sort of hold back from this explanation, because I think it limits your almost desire or your ability to really dig deep into the depths, because at any point where you're just a little hedge, you'll just be like, it's probably some polemic against who knows what.
So why did he bring Kipei
Or the
Shuto?
academic approach. What?
So why did he bring Kipei Shuto?
Why did he bring Kipei Shuto? That's a good point. We saw this already. We saw this above with the Amma of Miriam, not Miriam, of Bat Paro, right? Where he brought here, right? He said, Et amata, et shivchata. Vivrabotenu darshu lashon yad, aval lefi diktuk lashon hakodesh, it can't be that, right? And we said that maybe, what is it Rashi doing here? Why is he bringing this midrash? And what we wanted to explain was, there is something in the Pesukim that he's not comfortable with, which is the Na'aroteha, and then Vatishlach et Amata. Sorry, et Amata, right? So maybe there's something here, right? Which is, this is the pshat. If you put a gun to Rashi's head and say, what does the pasuk mean? Translate the pasuk. He would write, if he was writing an English translation, he would write, Lo merubechem, not because of your multitude. But if you asked him, what's an alternative explanation that's also can be justified within the words, he would say this. Right? That seems to be what it is. Again, we're clearly running into this issue or this impasse where Rashi tells us his goal is one thing, which is the faresh pishuto shemakra and bring divrei chazal that miyashev, and there are certain instances where he deviates from that goal. That's fine. That you can't have. The Rambam says he's never going to bring a cholek in the Mishneh Torah, and sometimes he says hageonim amru kacha v'ani omer kacha. Maybe it's 10 times. Does that mean that the other 40,000 halachot are not what he's? No. The overall work is one thing. Okay, there's exceptions to every rule. Okay. Then there is this. I kind of want to skip over this because I just don't really feel like it's germane to our topic. But these are some. This is from one of the articles that I read that basically surveyed all of Rashi and said that these are like the 7. I think they actually had 8 that I took one out because they didn't have so many examples and I didn't really fit it on the slide. But basically that these are the most important things that Rashi cares about, right? So, right, all these sorts of things. And we don't need to go through all of them, but you could just see the titles, right? Severity of Lashon Hara, treating the downtrodden with compassion and mercy, love for the people of Israel, love for the forefathers, love for the land of Israel. These are things that he constantly comes back to. Now, this is the page that I really love. I only really appreciated this once I was hanging a little bit around in rabbinic circles. Isaac, this page is for you. I made this page for you. Okay? This also I got from that article, and I think it's really cool. And this is really to showcase the extent to which Rashi has permeated Jewish vocabulary, to the extent that it's almost as if it's common expression to use some of these expressions, and people don't even know what they're from. Even in modern Hebrew, you use them, and you don't even know what's going on. I remember one time I was in a shiur of Rabbi Avishai David of Shraga, and he said this expression, "Ma inyan shmita etzel hars," right? He says, "Ma inyan shmita etzel harsina," right? And I had just learned that Rashi, but everyone else didn't know what he was talking about. It means when you want to say, what's this have to do with that, right? Why do the laws of Shemitah, why does it say the laws of Shemitah, Behar Sinai Lemor, right? Behar, Parshat Behar introduces the laws of Shemitah, and it says, Right? Deber Hashem Moshe behar Sinai. So Rashi opens up and says, behar Sinai, ma'inyan shmita etzel har Sinai. It's a rhetorical question. What does this have to do with that? This became an expression, ma'inyan shmita etzel har Sinai. So these are all expressions that the famous ones that Rashi basically has inculcated into the language of Jewish speech. Right? So you have the Mikan omrim miksat shivcho shel adam befanav vechulo shelo befanav. Right? You don't say a person's praise. If you're praising someone, you don't want to say all of it in front of him and it'll make him too arrogant. Right? Or you have here oy la rasha, oy la shchena. Right? That's a classic one. Right? You want to say like you see someone who's hanging out with the wrong crowd finally get what he deserves. Right? Oy la rasha, oy la shchena. Right? Or berachel b'techa hakitana, right? When you're signing a contract, you say berachel b'techa hakitana, meaning like I am being exactly berachel b'techa, your daughter, hakitana, the younger one, right? To specify exactly. Right? This is a classic one when there's talking about leadership. You can't have two crowns, right? So these are all. This is just let's see, which one's this one? Right? Your own issue, don't tell your friend. Right? So this is achad ba'peh, achad ba'lev. These are all interesting ones, and it just shows the extent to which learning Chumash Rashi has become so ingrained, and hence the expressions have become just a part of normal vocabulary. If you sit in on a Moreshet Yerushalayim meeting, these are how people communicate with each other, right? I'm not even kidding. Like this is, and it takes a while till you get familiar with these terms, but when you learn Chumash Rashi, you enter into a whole vortex of language. You end up, you could be fluent in modern Hebrew and not understand what's going on. People are talking in expressions you never heard of. Okay, this is Rashi. This is we're ending sort of. We're going to transition, but we're really not done with Rashi because we're going to be dealing with his student and his grandson today. Well, for the remaining time, however much we have. Oh, we got time. And so we're really going to keep Rashi as our in the back of our heads because everyone's really, as we said, once he's on the scene, everyone's in conversation with him. It's impossible. He's too influential and too great to ignore. And he's speaking with the voice of Chazal. It's not, most of the time, it's not Rashi's own opinion. It's his opinion and how he flavors the Midrash and how he puts it in this context and how he explains the Pesukim as the Pshat based off of the Midrash. But one last thing I want to say on Rashi, because it's going to be important for us to transition, is that we often think of Rashi as Midrash man, right? And the reason why that is because in elementary, one of the reasons why that is because we learn in elementary school, we start from Bereshit. Bereshit, by definition, lends itself to a lot more Midrashe Agada than Vaikra. Someone who learned Vaikra with Rashi is much more understanding of how Rashi is trying to understand the pshat of the Pesukim when he's telling you which chatat ha'of was brought, and he proves it from the order that was said in the other parasha, and he's going back and forth just to, to bring one example, or when he's doing Parashat Kedoshim, and he's telling you what Lifnei Ver Lo Titin Mechshol means, and he's bringing Ma'amarei Chazal to prove that that's the pshat of the Pesukim, right? Someone who reads that kind of Rashi gets a very different picture than when you read Rashi, right? Anochi Esav Bechorecha, right? It's a different type of person. It's not a different type of person. It's that we don't appreciate his work in Pshat because we learn it from that way. And then we never end up learning Chumash Rashi, Vaikra, and Devarim, and all those things, right? We never learn it. So, or the Tirumat Tetzaveh, we never, right? So, so Rashi was, at least in his mind, we could disagree because we have a different idea of what Pshat means, but at least in his mind, he was Pshat. His goal was Pshat. Like I said, maybe he even deviated from that goal several times, fine. But he wanted to provide the Pshat, and the Pshat meant for him that every word is significant. There is no, for those of us who were in my class on Friday with the Ibn Ezra has no problem saying that this word, that word, this letter, that letter, it's not, don't make a big deal out of it. It's not, you don't need to make a meaning, or there's not a secret behind every single word. And, it's a general idea. The words are just the guf, he says, for the neshama, which is the meaning of the word. So if you have two words that are the same, right, It's not, the same meaning. You don't have to go crazy. Whereas Rashi would say, what do you mean? Why do you use this word here and that word there? What's it called coming to teach me, right? Every word has omni-significance. So but within that, he tries to get pshat. Good?
Yeah, so at this point, when he brings Midrash Agada, it's because he feels that that's a pshat.
He feels, well, each case you have to analyze differently, but there is something either there's something missing in the story,
Right.
or there's something that is missing in the text, or there's some difficulty in it. For him, it's perfectly okay, and this is going to be the number one point of contention between him and the person we're going to study now, really. It's not a point of contention, but the big difference is, Rabbi Yosef Kara, before we get to him, need to do whatever.
Weird.
The point of contention is, does the text always justify itself? Meaning to say, if I gave you the Torah, no midrashim, no chazal, could you figure it out? Is it all there? Or is it not all there? Meaning, if you read it carefully, can you get it? Can you get it?
We know it's not.
What?
We know it's not all there.
Hold on. You might not be able to know, what is totafot? What does the word totefet mean? But that's because you don't have a misorah about what that word means. But I'm saying, will you be able to follow the storyline and the message? That's what he wants to say. Will a pasuk have a clear meaning, right? You might not know what the word totafot means, but you might know that you need to put it on your face and on your head and on your arm, right? So that's really the difference between them. According to Rashi, if Chazal need to fill in a ton of gaps, I don't know if they're inventing, right? They're telling us, if I need to tell you that there was signs given to Rachel that Yaakov and Rachel had, and then Leah knew about them because Rachel told her, and that's why Yaakov thought it was Rachel. That's a whole story that's not in the text, but it's addressing a question that needs to be in the text, that needs to happen for someone that's reading the text. Again, you can choose how you want to answer that. Rashi's way of choosing it is saying, what did Chazal say? And many times he'll pick the more shot-based saying of Chazal, right? He won't say, we saw that with Yam Suf, right? There was Chazal say many things. He picked the one that he thought was more shot. But at the end of the day, if there's nothing else said, he's not going to say, I don't know what to do. I don't know why Yaakov didn't do it. And then make up his own answer. He's going to say, what did Chazal say about this? Whereas Rabbi Yosef Kara, as we're going to see, not going to say that. He's going to come up with something that might be a little bit more, we'll say, rational or simple, straightforward. Okay? We're going to see this also when we have Ibn Ezra, right? With the Atzeshitim and stuff like that. We're going to pick specific examples, God willing, when we're going to do probably Kara, RASHBAM, 2 units, and then probably Ibn Ezra, and then hopefully we'll have time for Ramban. But okay, so this is still a topic we're gonna, keep going on. So here we go. We're gonna transition from Rashi to RASHBAM, but before we do that, we need to speak about Rabbi Yosef Kara. So before we do that, let's make sure I covered all these. Right. So RASHBAM is a huge contrast to Rashi. It's almost as if they're on polar ends. But as I said, it's only because we don't usually study the people who were living in Germany and France before Rashi. Like Rabbi Moshe HaDarshan, we don't know what he wrote. We don't know what his stuff was, but it was very drasha oriented. Rashi was considered pshat, and then RASHBAM became super pshat. So I say like here, right? Rashi is to Rabbi Moshe HaDarshan as RASHBAM is to Rashi, right? In the analogy, right? Each one is pushing the needle a little bit more to the side of, Okay, so let's do a little bit of Rabbi Yosef Kara. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot about him. Basically, he lived in France, northern France, right the same as Rashi, went to Germany, and then ended up coming back at the end of his life and studying with Rashi in the Bet Midrash of Rashi. He quotes the Perush of Rashi many times. He wrote a commentary on all of Tanakh, but unfortunately we only have Nevi'im. So if you open up Mikraot Gedolot standard, it might not be there, but in the newer ones they have him. It's Mahari Kara, and he's very, very, very creative. I think I learned his Perush on Megillat Rut back in the day. Very creative, very says his own things, doesn't feel obligated to anyone. We'll see a couple of examples. Called Kara because he was someone who taught Tanakh, right? Kara, right, from the word Kara. And he's an important influence, and we really only care about this one, that he's a strong influence on Rashbam, but it's good to know that he's also on these other figures, Bechor Shor, one of the Baalei Tosfot, and Radak, and the Ralbag, because they're all interested in more Pshat-oriented. He's actually mentioned, this is cool, he's mentioned by Rashi. Rashi mentions my student, Rabbi Yosef Kara, in Mishnah 18:22. Okay, let's talk a little bit about him. It's very possible that because he was responsible for handwriting, for transcribing Rashi's commentary, that a lot of his comments end up being part of what we call Rashi today. So we don't know exactly what it is, but there are thousands of different manuscripts of Rashi, and so it's very possible that some of them have his comments in them. Let's go to the three main characteristics of his Perush. We said this is the big point of contention, Pshat, which means no need for Chazal. What that means is Peshat and Drash are two separate categories, not like Rashi, where the Drash can tell me what the Peshat is. Peshat and Drash are two separate categories. Peshat has everything that is needed in the text. Again, we could disagree what the Peshat of the text is, but you're telling me what you think from the text, and I'm telling you what I think from the text. Neither of us are going to say, what about the Gemara and Masechet Avodah? We're not going to make recourse to anything else. We're going to stay on the text, right? That's fine to make recourse to the Midrashim, but their goal is not to explain the Pshat. That's the real difference. According to Rashi, they definitely are, not even a question. He has an emphasis on literary technique and style, which will give a couple things. Basically, he is okay with saying the reason why the Torah used, mostly we know for Nevi'im, so it's more fair. We don't know if he would say it on Torah, but with Nevi'im, he's okay saying the Torah, the Navi uses the word pah, because he wanted to say the word nafah, and that's a play on the words, right? So he could have chosen a different word to say, but he wanted to keep it rhyme, right? So you have like in Yeshayahu, it says kol tzedakah l'se'akah, or something like that, right? There's like a plays on words like that where he'll say it, right? He says that sometimes there's just words that are added, not because they're needed or to teach me any chidush, but just to complete, if it's, to complete what he calls the meter, which is basically the syllable scheme. So if you have, right, it has to be what's called in tikbolet, like a parallel structure, right? You have Shimu Devar Hashem Anshe Sedom Ve'azinu something Am Amora, right? That's clearly a tikbolet. Am Amora is Anshe Sedom Ha'azinu, and Charles, help me out with that pasuk over there. We just read it, Shabbat Chazon.
Which one?
Shemu Devar Hashem Anshe Sedom Ha'azinu Am something Anshe something Am Amora. Devar Hashem Am Amora. Okay, anyways, it's a parallel structure. He also has basically certain rules that he'll give over that he basically says are rules of Torah. So he'll say what's called preemption, which is basically sometimes you'll have a story in Tanakh, and interrupted in the story is a detail about something that's going to happen 80 years from now. Not 80 years, but like down the road. The question is why? So he is Mefaresh that Tanakh does this often, so that when you get to that place down the road, the Torah doesn't have to again reintroduce it. So the example he gives is with Shaul and David David Yonatan are having a discussion, I believe. Oh no, I think it's Shaul and David are having a discussion. And then all of a sudden the pasuk says, by the way, Doeg Ha'adomi was living in this town over there, right? And you're like, and then it goes back to the discussion. What are you doing? So he says that's the Torah basically, in modern terms, Lavdil, like in a movie when you have like something happening and then they show you in the other room what's happening, like a flash away, and then they show you now, it sort of builds up the suspense, but in the Torah, it's also filling in the details because it can't have a split screen. It can't have that. So it's sort of trying to give you the feel of a split screen, trying to tell you what's happening in a completely different, right? In Shemot, it says, Bnei Yisrael ate the man for 40 years. In the middle of Shemot, et haman achalu 40 shana ad boam al eretz noshavet. Why, he says? He says, this is the first time he's telling you, so that every time people complain about man, about not having food, you know that they had man. So that not every time it has to say, Bnei Israel were eating man, and they got sick of the man, and they complained for me. So it tells you the first time that they will be eating man for 40 years, and that you know every time they're complaining, they still have man. So this is sort of like a preemptive item. And then he has a thing about double language, double meaning, which is basically, to give an example, when this he doesn't say, we don't have this, but based on the other examples brought in Navi, it would reason to say that he would say something like this, right? You have, Vayomer lo malach Hashem Avraham Avraham. Al tishlach yadecha al anard, al ta'as lo me'uma. 2 times Avraham, 2 different directives, right? Or Avraham Vayomer hineni, kach et bincha yichidecha v'ha'alehu le'olah. 2 different directives, right? Meaning there's 2. There's not. It's sort of like interjected. Avraham, and he understood that meant this directive, and then Avraham, the second one, was meant for another directive. Okay, so here's just one comparison, we'll say, between Rashi and Maharikara. It's very informative because we'll see what we learn from it. This is in Shmuel Aleph, when Hashem tells Shaul to kill Amalek, and he doesn't, right? And now he comes. Well, this is the command. Right? And now listen to the voice of the words of God. And then it says what Amalek did. And then it says, kill all the people and the ox and sheep. And he counted them with lambs, the people for war. And they were acting vilely. Okay? So now this is what the Pesukim are describing. And Rashi says, listen to now, ve'ata, right? Ve'ata is going to be a thing. Why ve'ata? Because one time you already acted like a dib. Now make sure you pay attention. Okay. Tells us what Amalek did. Ox and Rashi is quiet. Ox and sheep. What does Rashi say? Why do I need to kill the ox and sheep of Amalek? Because they could transform themselves into sheep and then flip back out. He counted them with lambs. He told everyone to take a lamb from the king's flocks. And afterwards, he counted the lambs. Explaining what that means, he counted them with lambs. How do you count? It means everyone bring a lamb and we're going to count the lambs because we don't want to count the people. Nimivzeh, which is the word, right, for vile. He says it's exactly like nivzeh, which is the word, right? It just has an extra mem in there. And he says the mem is superfluous, right? So that's a classic. This is a very interesting Rashi. Parenthetically, you have him doing very pshat-oriented stuff here. A little bit of background info here, like what does it mean? I counted them with lambs. And then here, very midrashic spin on why you need to kill the ox and sheep. But even what I want to point out, what I hope I made clear, is that even in this one, Rashi is not throwing in unnecessary, might be considered to us unnecessary details. But why is he's bothered by a question that arises from the pshat of the Pesukim? When you are, right, it's not that he's just throwing something out there for no reason. He's bothered with, why do you need to kill the ox and sheep of Amalek? They didn't do anything. So he's bothered from a thing in the, okay. Maharikara says, in other words, and now listen, he says, if you do not listen at first, when you do not keep your promise, right, now listen so that you will not violate God's command. So clearly, Rashi is just, once you acted foolishly, is already all in that, right? So Maharikara here is really giving a lot more background to the reader about what he did wrong beforehand, that the word ve'ata is coming. But he's really right on target with Rashi. They're in the same, right? They're both understanding ve'ata needs to be some sort of future-oriented, meaning something's different now, you need to get your act together, but he just explains it more. And again, in this one, he's also giving the reader some more background background info about Amalek. And now he says like this is the big difference, the big departure. Ox and sheep, so that they may not say, this ox is Amalek, meaning this is the sheep of Amalek, meaning we don't want to remember anything to do with Amalek. So if you leave some of their animals alive, people are going to be like, oh, that's the famous, Billy the cow of Amalek, right? And that's a problem because, Timchaya et Shemam, you got to get rid of their name. So we want to obliterate all the things. So he's bothered by the same question as Rashi, but he chooses a different route to answer it. And here he goes again, he goes right off of Rashi's, takes off of Rashi's lead, but makes it a little bit more clear what's exactly happening. And then here, he doesn't feel a need to explain anything because Rashi already did it, meaning he's aware that everyone already has Perush Rashi. So he only feels to add things when they're going to add a little explanation, or if there's a big difference, like which is exemplified here. Good. That's the extent of what we're going to do for Maharikara as an individual. But what we're really going to use him for is because if you look at the years, right? If we go back to the years, where's Rashi's first here? 1040 to 1105. This is really cool. 1040 to 1105. When does Maharikara live? This should say 1060 to 1130. Sorry about that. I got the years, guys. 1060 to 1130. And when is RASHBAM living? 1080 to 1150. So everyone is in a unit of 20, which means that he's 20 when he's born and he's 20 when he's born. So they're like, and Rashi is 40 when RASHBAM is born, basically. But the point is that it's not Rashi RASHBAM. It's Rashi, Rabbi Yosef Kara, RASHBAM, and he's sort of the intermediary. He's the one who pushes it a little bit more towards the pshat. The RASHBAM is, not, the RASHBAM's yardstick is not Rashi anymore, really. It's really Rabbi Yosef Kara. So less, we'll say revolutionary, still revolutionary in general, but less, we'll call it out there. Rashi's grandson, right? That's important to know about the RASHBAM. We mentioned that. Mother is Yocheved, which is Rashi's oldest daughter. The father is Rabbi Meir ben Shmuel. He's the younger brother of the Rivam, one of the first Baalei Tosfot. Maybe not, scratch that. The Rivam, who died young, but he's quoted in the Tosafot. He wasn't one of the Baalei Tosfot. And RASHBAM is the older brother of Rabbeinu Tam, probably the most famous of the Baalei Tosfot and probably one of the most important rabbis for Ashkenaz Jewry ever. Born in northern France, sold milk and fur from sheep that he owned. Okay, wrote commentary on parts of the Talmud, Pesachim, Baba Batra. He probably wrote more. It's just not printed inside of the Vilna, so we don't really know about it. All of Tanakh, he wrote a commentary, but we only have on Torah and Ketuvim. Also was involved in some poetry and debated Christians in his lifetime and understood Latin. Meaning, when I say debated Christians, I don't mean wrote about what Christians think. I mean, in real live person, he debated Christians. And he was fluent in Latin, which allows him to really debate Christians well. Okay, let's look at the most famous piece of the RASHBAM. This is really going to be our, jumping point, whatever it's called. And here we go. And RASHBAM didn't write an introduction. None of the rabbis that we've discussed so far, Rabbeinu Saadia did, but it's not yet a thing really to write introduction. Ele Toldot Yaakov. So this happens, this is brought here. It's a complicated thing about the manuscripts of the RASHBAM. We'll get to it, God willing, next week when we talk about his controversy and why he's really pretty, radical sometimes, and hence the less extant amount of manuscripts. But basically, this is a comment that, again, appears in the middle of Parashat Vayeshev, but actually talks a lot about what his purpose here is going to be. So he says, Ele Toldot Yaakov, Yaskilu v'yavinu ohave sechel mashil medunu rabotenu. The people of wisdom will understand that this is the key line. En mikra yotze mideh peshuto. Isaac's getting excited. Af ki ikara shel Torah ba'at l'lamedenu ulhodienu beremizat hapshat, right? Hahagadot v'halachot v'adinim ha'idei arichut halishon v'ha'idei shloshim u'shtayim midot shel Rabbi Elazar Eliezer ben Aaron shel Rabbi Yosef v'ha'idei shlosh midot shel Rabbi Yishmael. It says, this isn't to say that the hints within the pshat aren't there to help me learn things out, halachot and dinim. And he says, even hagadot, right? How do they do that? Through arichut halashon and through the midot shatorah nidreshet. Meaning to say, the Torah has certain things that are ambiguous or worded in a strange way or in an awkward way or anything like that. That's to open the door to give me a remez of the pshat and for us to use the shlosh midot to find out what the halacha is. But that's not the pshat. Okay, and this is really his most radical thing. והראשונים, מתוך חסידותם נתעסקו לנטות אחרי הדרשות שהן עיקר, ומתוך כך לא הורגלו בעומק פשוטו של מקרא. This is going to be his go-to, this line. עומק פשוטו של מקרא, the depth of the pshat, right? Rabbi Chaim Angel has a book titled Pshat is not so simple, right? People often say pshat means simple. It doesn't. It's not so pashut, right? The pshat is not so pashut. Despite the fact that Rabbi Reichman in Torah used to say, pashut pshat in the pasuk. It's not so pashut. ולפי שאמרו חכמים, אל תרבו ביניכם בהיגיון, וגם אמרו, העוסק במקרא, מידה ואין המידה, העוסק בתלמוד, אין לך מידה גדולה מזו. He said, now he's giving an excuse. He's basically saying, the reason why I'm the only one who cares about Pshat, or I'm the only one writing a book about it, is because our Chachamim, meaning Chazal, didn't really encourage it as much as they encouraged the study of Talmud. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing about being a Jew is how you act on the day-to-day. That was the most important thing, especially in Galut. Looking into the Pshat of the Pesukim is less important, less fundamental. That didn't become the bread and butter, right? Fine. V'gam Rabbeinu Shlomo, and this is the part that everyone loves to quote. V'gam Rabbeinu Shlomo, avi imi me'er enei hagola, right? My Rabbeinu Shlomo Rashi, the father of my mother, me'er enei hagola, the one who brought light to all the. It's funny. Rashi uses that expression to describe Rabbeinu Gershom, and his grandson's using it to describe him. This is what Rashi wanted to do, but I had arguments with him, right, with him and in front of him, and he admitted to me what this specific phrase means is very interesting, but basically he says that Rashi agreed to me, my grandfather, my Zaidi, agreed to me, and said that if he had more time, he would write a new perush that would be according to the pshat that is mitchadeshet b'chol yom. And then he says, and then he goes and says, and this is what, what's going on. And one of the things that we're going to look at Parshat Vayeshev, because one of the things that is groundbreaking, or not groundbreaking, but very creative about the Rashbam, and I'll say it now, and I hope you guys come to the next class, but he holds that the brothers never sold Yosef, right? It's a radical opinion. And you read the Torah and you're like, what do you mean? I've learned it and it's in the Pesukim. But then you just read him and then you read the Pesukim again and you're like, wait, maybe it's not so pashut. So he's really going to just try and give us the strip down, what is it, what's going on. And the real, I'll call it a problem, but the real, I don't want to say a problem, but the real thing that got him into trouble, we'll put it like that, was that he wasn't bound by halachic conclusions either. Meaning, if ayin tahat ayin, right, he'll tell you the halacha is not ayin tachat ayin. That's not the pshat. Who says the halacha and the pshat have to be on the same thing, right? So that's radical, and that got him into big trouble, right? So we're going to have to discuss him more because he's very important, and he's made his way into a lot of the Mikraot Gedolot, Torah Chaim. He's really had a resurgence and a renaissance. And we're also going to have to distinguish him from Ibn Ezra, who usually they get thrown in because they're both pshat. They're both not Rashi, right? They're not midrashim people, right? So you have to really understand him. But in order to really understand him, we have to really look at Rabbi Yosef Kara because he's really the bridge. He's the middleman, the guy in between, both in age and in terms of he studied with him, he taught him. So, yeah. All right. So we'll do next time. We'll look at a piece, then we'll directly compare Rashi versus Rashbam, and then it'll be our starting point for next time. Does anyone have any questions?